Lesson 2.1, finding the mean. What does the mean mean? What does the mean mean? What does the mean mean? The average. Okay, finding the average. How do you find an average? Well, you first have to have a set of data. If I was to look at your test scores from yesterday, I would list all of your test scores. If I was to take all of your test scores, I would list them. And then I would do what? How do you find the average or the mean? How do you find it? What do? I know you did this last year. I know. Remember? I had a daughter in your class. Yes. What do you do, Caleb?
You
add them all up.
And then you multiply it by the number of
Not multiply. Divide it by the number of numbers, right? You add them all up, and then you divide by the number of numbers. If I have, say we were doing the quiz scores, and we have a 10, an 8, a 6, an 8, an 8, a 10, a 4, an 8, a 10, and a 6. If these were the 10 scores that we had, what would I do with these to find the average or to find the mean? You understand that average is the layman's terms and mean is the technical term. You ever heard of that? A layman's term? Here's the deal. If we were to get a engineer or a nuclear physicist in here to start talking about fission and how a nuclear bomb works, and he talked the way he talks to his colleagues, he would be saying the micro evolution, the micro escalation of the electrodes from the, and you'd be like, what? Right? You'd be like, excuse me, could you speak in layman's terms? See, a layman is for everybody, a term that is kind of like universally, like everybody, no matter how educated you are, no matter how much of an expert you are, it's a term that everybody understands. Average is the layman term. Okay, the layman's term. Everybody knows what that means. The mean is the technical term. Does that make sense? That is the math term. So on your tests and on your quizzes, I'm going to ask you to tell me the mean. And you need to know that the mean means average, right? Does that make sense? All right. You add all these up. This is what I would do if I were you for future. For like tomorrow's lesson, if I were you, I would list them from greatest to smallest. That's what I would do. It's up to you. Notice what I'm doing. As I make my list, I cross them off of the data chart, right? 8, 8, 8, 8, 8, 8, 8, 8, 6, 6, 6, 6, 4. I've now put them in order. Do you agree? Okay. Add them up. This is where grouping really helps. 10 times 3, you see them, is 30. And now I have 4 8s. 4 times 8 is 32. 30 plus 32 is 62. Plus 6, 68. Plus 6, 74. 78. So we have a total of 78. We go 78 divided by, and then how many total numbers were there? You divide it by the number of numbers, which is 10. 78 divided by 10 is 7.8. The mean to this data, or the mean to your quiz scores, would be 7.8. Add them all up, divide by the number of numbers. That's how you find the mean. Add them all up, divide by the number of numbers. Sometimes they'll say to round to the nearest whole. If that was true, what would your answer be here? 8. Sometimes they'll say to round to the nearest tenth. 7.8. Sometimes they'll say the hundredth. If I was to ask you on this data right here, what is this round to the nearest hundredth? What would you say? If I want you to round it to the nearest hundredth, that means you have to give me up to the hundredths. You would say 7.80. That's what you would say. Does that make sense? Okay. Let's do a couple practice ones. Something else. Every once in a while, you will have some number that really throws the mean off. Every once in a while, you'll have a number that will throw the mean off. Let's talk about this for a second. Do you guys know anything about how much houses are worth in like Walnut Creek? How much do you think that, like, you're just talking about, like, just go into Walnut Creek, what is the 10th house down on Buena Vista here? What's it worth? Just, I don't even know what the 10th house is. Just tell me, do you have any idea what houses in Walnut Creek are worth? How much they could sell for? Any clue?
20,000?
No, 20,000's a car.
23,000?
No, a house. Any idea? Any idea, Jonathan? In Walnut Creek here, these houses are probably worth in the neighborhood of 500,000. $500,000. Right now, probably about $500,000. Okay? 500,000. In Martinez, the average house is probably worth about, 350 or 400,000. Concord, same thing. Does that make sense? We're talking about a few $100,000. So, if I was to, let's just say this. If you were to tell somebody about how much does it cost to live in Walnut Creek, you would say, I don't know, $500,000. That's how much it costs to buy a house in Walnut Creek. And if you were to look at some data, if I was to give you some data and say that, so one house sold for 400,000. Oops. You guys know that 400K means 400,000, right? And another house sold for 500,000. And another house sold for 600,000. If I was to say, okay, what is the average house sell for in Walnut Creek? What would you say here? What would you do? You'd look at the data, and what would you do? How do you find the average? Yeah. Add them up, and then divide by the number of numbers, which is 3. So 400 plus 500 plus 600 is 1,500. 1,500 divided by 3 is back to 500, which means that the average house in Walnut Creek is 500,000. Agreed? So you could tell people, yeah, okay, the average house in Walnut Creek is 500,000. Well, what if in that same week, one of those houses, the giant houses up on the hills, sold? Are those things worth about 500,000? No. Those things are worth a few million. What if that thing was worth let's say it was worth 3,500,000. Does that make sense? 3 million, which is true. Those houses up there on the hills in Walnut Creek, they're probably worth 3 million. They're really nice mansions. If you were to take the average now, let's look at this. What is the average of these houses? Well, let's look. We go 400 plus 500 plus 600 is 1,500 plus 3,000 plus 3,500, 1,500 is 5 million, right? This is a total of 5,000, which is 5 million. And you have to divide that by 4. And you go, okay, well, then when you divide that by 4, it comes out to 1.25 or $1,250,000. And you go, oh man, the average house in Walnut Creek is. Now I have a question. Is that true? Is the average house, is the normal house in Walnut Creek 1.2 million? No. Almost all the houses are going to be around 500,000. Agreed? But if you throw in just one big number, oh man, the average gets way off. You see what I'm talking about? It really messes things up. That number that is way off is called an outlier. O-U-T-L-I-E-R, an outlier. An outlier is a number that throws off the average. The only way it could throw off the average is if it was either way more or way less than where the rest of the numbers are. Let's just say this. Let's do another one. We'll do quiz scores again. Let's say that here are the quiz scores. 10, 10, 8, 10, 10. We'll just do this right here. 10, 10, 8, 10. How did the class do? If it's out of 10, how did the class do on this? Really good, right? There's 3 perfects and an 8. And if you were to take an average of this class, you go, okay, well, you go 10 plus 10 plus 10 is 30, 38. 38 divided by 4 is 9.5. Hold on. So the mean would be 9.5. And you go, yes, that's a really good quiz score for the class. Agreed? But what if Jimmy didn't study at all and he got a Zippo? He got a zip. Now suddenly, Now suddenly, what's our average? Well, it's 38, but it's not divided by 4 anymore, it's divided by 5. 5 goes into 38 7 times. Decimal, decimal, 0. Ooh, our average is now 7.6, which is a 76, because of one child. What was once, you would be like, the average is 9.5 out of 10, which is a 95%. Now it's gone down to a 76% because of one person. Is there an outlier here? Is there something that really threw off the average? Yes, the 0 threw off the average. Does that make sense? That would be called an outlier. Even if Jimmy here would have gotten even if he would have gotten like a 4, I would still say that's an outlier. That would have pulled the whole average way down because he is all by himself out there without anyone being near him. Does that make sense? He is alone. He's all by himself. I hear you. Just wait. Does that make sense? Anything that is all, listen, there's going to be a clump of data. There's always going to be a clump, right? 400,000, 500,000, 600,000, whatever. And then if there's one that's, like, even if there was a $1 million house thrown in there, that 1 million would be an outlier because it would really bring up the average. Or if one house, what if one dad sold this house to his son for $1? All of a sudden, like, oh man, that's going to bring it all down and be it's going to lie going down. Does that make sense? So things that are not near the clump, either high or low, is called an outlier. And you have to take into account that number. Okay? What a lot of times people will do is they won't even count outliers. They won't even count them. Like if you were going to find out what the average house in Walnut Creek costs, you wouldn't even count the $3.5 million house that sold because it will mess things up. That's not really real. And if I want to know how the class did, well, just because that Jimmy kid didn't study, I would throw his out and look at, okay, the rest of the class is really good. Make sense? You had a question, Jonathan? Probably. No? There was no 0 before, right? When I did that right there. Yeah, no, it's not 7.3. You'll have to learn how to do this later. Yeah, definitely not. You'll learn that later. Make sense? Add them all up, divide by the number of numbers. That's how you find the average. What's an outlier? Whatever, yeah. And so how do you know if it's an outlier or not? Well, how do you know? Can you just look at some data and know what it is? How do you know if it's an outlier? Right. If it's a long way away from the clump of numbers, or either high or low, then it's an outlier, right? Look at number 15 on page 63. Look at number 15. It says, for each set of data, identify any outliers. Then determine the effect that the outlier has on the mean. Look at the data there for number 15 and see if you see any outliers, if any outliers stand out. Is there any number there that stands out, Momo? 50. All the other numbers are between 6 and 12, right? And then there's one that's a 50, okay? So that's the outlier. And then it says, determine the effect that the outlier would have on the mean. What would that 50 do to the mean? What would it do, Jared? It would raise it up. It would make it higher. Agreed? Okay. Look at number 14. Do you see any outliers there? Look at number 14. Is there any outlier? Emily? 40. Agreed. What effect would that have on the mean? It would bring it down. Make sense? Make sense? Okay. Your assignment. I think. Let me make sure. Where's my... Oh, There it is.